Charles Donovan, a successful lawyer in New York, had everything many dreamed of: a solid career, a luxury apartment on the Upper West Side, and the respect of his colleagues. Life for him was a series of achievements and awards, each time winning an invisible medal in his already decorated collection of mental trophies. But behind his confident smile and impeccable suit, Charles carried a certain indifference toward people he considered insignificant. Every morning he followed the same routine. He would leave his building, stop at the cafe on the corner, get his latte with almond milk, and, on his way out, pass by an elderly woman who, despite her modest attire and tired appearance, was always there, sitting in the most discreet corner of the cafe. With a simple tea in hand, she looked out the window with a serenity that Charles never understood. He saw her as part of the landscape, someone unimportant, someone he, in his mind, judged as Lee. One morning, as he passed by it again, something different caught his attention. The woman, who always seemed deep in her own thoughts, was speaking to a young man, handing him an envelope before stroking his cheek with a tender gesture. The scene aroused Charles's curiosity, but he quickly dismissed it as a simple meeting between grandmother and grandson. But over the weeks, Charles began to notice that this woman, whom he previously ignored, repeated the same gesture with different young people, always handing over an envelope and offering words of encouragement. His curiosity grew day by day, until he decided to investigate what was going on. Charles, with his instinct as a lawyer, began to ask discreet questions, first to the cafe's barista, then to other patrons who seemed to know the lady. It turned out her name was Evelyn Thompson, a woman many in the neighborhood knew, but few actually knew anything substantial about her life. To them, Evelyn was just a constant figure, someone who existed without making an impact. But what Charles discovered next changed everything. Upon investigating further, he discovered that the envelopes Evelyn handed over contained checks, not to grandchildren, but to young people struggling to continue their education. These young people, from humble beginnings, were all enrolled in prestigious universities, thanks to Evelyn's anonymous financial support. Intrigued, Charles delved even deeper and began to realize that these young people had one thing in common. They all came from a local charity that he, in his bubble of success, had. He determined to find out more about this institution and eventually about Evelyn. The search led him to an orphanage on the outskirts of the city, where he finally discovered the unexpected. Evelyn was not just a benefactor, but the founder of a foundation that, for decades, had been supporting orphans and underprivileged young people on their academic journey. It was then that Charles' life began to take a direction he never could have predicted. What was initially just curiosity turned into a journey of self-discovery as he began to confront his own beliefs and prejudices. Charles couldn't get Evelyn out of his head. His daily routine, which was once a symbol of his success, began to feel empty. He found himself increasingly drawn to the mystery of the elderly woman, whose quiet, seemingly unassuming life hid such a huge impact. Determined to find out more, he decided to do something he never imagined: meet Evelyn in person. One morning, he arrived at the cafe earlier than usual and, taking courage, approached Evelyn. With a polite smile, he introduced himself. "Good morning. I'm Charles Donovan. I usually see you here every morning. May I sit down?" Evelyn looked up from her tea and studied him for a moment before smiling gently. "Of course, Charles. We've seen each other a few times, but we've never talked, have we?" From that first meeting, Charles began to visit her regularly, meeting Evelyn every morning. Their conversations were simple at first, exchanging superficial stories about the city, the weather, or the day's events. But as the days passed, Charles realized there was a depth to Evelyn that he couldn't decipher. He did not immediately mention what he had discovered about the checks or the foundation. He preferred to get to know her better, allowing her to gradually reveal more of herself. Evelyn, in turn, seemed to enjoy the unexpected company of Charles, a man she had also watched over the years, always running around so different from the young people she helped. As the weeks went by, Charles began to share his own frustrations and doubts. He confessed to Evelyn that despite all his success, there was something missing in his life, a feeling of emptiness that he had never been able to fill, even with all his achievements. Evelyn listened attentively, sometimes offering simple advice, but always full of wisdom. During one of these conversations, Evelyn casually mentioned the foundation. "You know, Charles, I've always believed that we all have the power to change the world around us, even if it's in a small way. I started helping these young people because I saw potential in each of them that couldn't be wasted." Intrigued, Charles asked more about the young people. Evelyn told moving stories of how each of them faced incredible adversity, poverty, broken homes, lack of opportunities, but still found the strength to fight for a better future. "They just need someone to believe in them," Evelyn said, her eyes shining with emotion. Listening to these stories, Charles felt a mixture of admiration and shame. He admired Evelyn's strength of character and her dedication, but he was ashamed for having been so blind around her. He began to reflect on his own life, on how he had focused so much on his career that he had neglected other ways of living. But not everything was clear to Charles. He still didn't understand how an elderly, seemingly simple woman could finance so many young people. He decided to investigate further, using his lawyer skills to discover the origin of the money Evelyn donated. It was then that he faced his first major obstacle: unexpected resistance from Evelyn herself. When she realized Charles was probing her life, she confronted him, saying she didn't want her acts of kindness exposed or used as a promotional tool. "Charles," she said firmly, "the good we do should be for the good itself, not for glory or recognition." This confrontation shook Charles. He felt betrayed by himself, as if he had violated the trust of a person he had come to deeply respect. But at the same time, curiosity and the need to understand the bigger picture pushed him to continue. Charles then met Sarah, a young woman who had been one of the first beneficiaries of Evelyn's help. Now graduated and working as a teacher at a public school, Sarah was grateful to Evelyn for everything she had achieved, but she also harbored a secret that Charles could not have predicted. In a tense conversation, Sarah revealed that Evelyn had been a very wealthy woman in her youth, but had lost everything after one fatal mistake, signing a contract that ruined her family financially. Sarah explained that after the tragedy, Evelyn dedicated her life to rebuilding what was left, not for herself, but for those who could still do something meaningful with their lives. "She gave me a chance when no one else believed in me," Sarah said. "She saw something in me that I couldn't see myself." Evelyn's story began to unfold before Charles's eyes, and with each piece of the puzzle he uncovered, he realized how shallow his own life had been. The shine on his career began to fade as he confronted the reality of what really mattered. The days following Sarah's revelation were a whirlwind for Charles. He couldn't get the image of Evelyn out of his mind, a woman who had lost everything, but who still found the strength to give to others what she herself had lost. He began to question his own motivations, his purpose in life, and what really mattered. Despite Evelyn's warnings not to deepen his investigations, Charles was unable to contain himself. There was something more to her story that he needed to understand. He then decided that the only way to discover the truth was to confront her directly, even though he knew that this could end the friendship he had been building. One morning, meeting her at the cafe, Charles finally opened up. "Evelyn, I need to understand, how do you do it? How can someone who has gone through so many difficulties find the strength to help others? And where does this money come from? It's not just curiosity, I need to know to understand how to live mine own life." Evelyn, who until then maintained her usual serene smile, changed her expression. His eyes revealed a deep sadness, as if all his pain and secrets were being brought to the surface. She placed the cup of tea on the table and took a deep breath. "Charles," she began, her voice soft but firm, "some things in life don't need to be fully understood but just accepted. I did what I did because I saw no other choice. When I lost everything, I realized it wasn't the possessions materials that would define me, but rather what I could do with the time I had left. And as for the money, it comes from a source I would prefer to keep hidden, for reasons you may never fully understand." But Charles, determined to know the truth, insisted. And it was then that Evelyn made a revelation that changed everything. She told Charles that, many years earlier, she had been married to a business tycoon, a man whose financial empire was built on corrupt practices and shady deals. She was unaware at the time of his involvement in illicit activities, until it was too late. When everything came to light, her husband was arrested, and she lost all her assets. However, a small amount of money, which had been kept secret by her husband for emergencies, was left in her hands. This money, soiled by crime, was the last thing that remained of a life she wanted to forget. Evelyn decided that the only way to redeem this money was to use it for good, transforming what had been the result of greed into opportunities for those who needed it most. "Every penny I gave to these young men," said Evelyn, her eyes filling with tears, "was an attempt to clear my own conscience, to make something good out of something that was born of evil. I may never be able to redeem what my husband did, but at least I can help those who still have a chance." Charles was speechless. The revelation about Evelyn's past hit him like a bolt of lightning. The woman he saw as a pillar of kindness and simplicity was, in fact, carrying a heavy burden of guilt and responsibility. She wasn't just helping young people, she was trying to right the wrongs of a past that tormented her. This moment marked a profound change in Charles. He realized that, like Evelyn, he too was living a life defined by appearances and external success, while ignoring the deeper questions of what it meant to truly live. He felt an urgency to change, to do something meaningful with his own life, but this epiphany came with a price. As he grew closer to Evelyn and understood her motivation, Charles realized he had crossed a line. Evelyn, although grateful for Charles' friendship, could no longer allow him to delve deeper into her life. She began to withdraw from him, declining coffee invitations and limiting their interactions. "Charles," she said in one of their last conversations, "I appreciate what we've tried to build here, but there are things you don't have to carry. This is my Joe." Charles, now caught between his new understanding of life and the loss of a friendship that had become so important, was forced to confront the loneliness he had been trying to avoid his entire life. For the first time, he found himself without answers, without the control he had always valued. And it was in this vacuum that he began to reinvent himself. The days after Evelyn's departure were difficult for Charles. Her absence from his routine left a void he didn't know how to fill. The woman who had inspired him so much was now distant, and the connection he had come to value had disappeared like sand between his fingers. But along with that emptiness came unexpected clarity. Charles knew he needed to change. Not for Evelyn, but for himself. He started with small gestures. Instead of rushing to work, he started walking around the neighborhood, observing the people and the world around him. He began attending the orphanage that Evelyn had supported, volunteering for community projects. There he met young people who, although they faced immense difficulties, carried a sparkle in their eyes, a hope that Charles had not seen in his own reflection for years. One of these young women, Mia, particularly caught his attention. She was a brilliant student with a promising future, but a lack of resources threatened her dreams. Charles, touched by her story, decided to use his network of contacts to get her a scholarship. It was a small act, but for Charles it was the first time he felt like he was doing something genuinely good without expecting anything in return. But Charles' journey of self-discovery was not without challenges. At the office, his colleagues began to notice changes in his behavior. He, who used to be the first to arrive and the last to leave, began to dedicate less time to work and more to his community activities. Some colleagues saw him as a naive idealist. Others thought he was missing the point. Charles had to deal with criticism and even disapproval from his superiors, who did not understand why such a promising lawyer was diverting. These criticisms raised doubts but also reinforced his determination. For the first time, Charles found himself willing to fight for something that wasn't driven by ambition or status, but by a deep need to find meaning. He began to question the values that had until then guided his life and wondered if success really meant having everything he had achieved. Meanwhile, his relationship with Evelyn remained distant, but not completely severed. At times, when he saw her from a distance in the cafe, he felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Evelyn had been the catalyst for his transformation, but he understood that his journey needed to continue, even without her presence. It was during this moment of reflection that Charles made the most difficult decision of his life, resigning from his position at the law firm. He realized that to find true peace and purpose, He needed to remove himself from the environment that had shaped him but now felt suffocating. He wanted to dedicate himself completely to helping others, something he felt he could only do if he were free from the shackles of his old life. The reaction from his colleagues and friends was mixed. Some called him crazy, others admired his courage. But Charles was undeterred. He knew this was the right decision for him, even if it meant losing the status and financial security he had achieved. With free time and a new perspective, Charles began working on larger projects. He founded a small organization dedicated to providing resources and legal support to low-income youth, especially those coming from at-risk situations. His goal was to use his lawyering skills to make a difference in a way that really mattered. During this process, he continued to learn about himself. He realized that his transformation was not a destination, but an ongoing journey. There were moments of doubt, of fear, but also of a new joy he had never experienced. Every young person he helped, every legal battle he fought on behalf of those without a voice, brought him a sense of accomplishment that no award or title could provide. It was during this period of growth that Charles had an unexpected encounter. One day, upon returning to the cafe where it all began, he found a letter left for him on the table where Evelyn used to sit. On the envelope, her name was written in Evelyn's delicate handwriting. Trembling, he opened the letter and read the words that would change his life once again. Carta de Evelyn. Charles, if you are reading this letter, it means that our time together served its purpose. I knew our friendship couldn't last, not in the way you wanted, but I also knew you needed something you could only find on your own. I see in you the man I always wanted to be, but never had the courage to become. You have a strength that few possess, and a kindness that has finally found its way to the surface. Keep going. Don't look back with regret, but with gratitude for what we learned together. There is so much more you can do, so much more you can be. And know that even from a distance, I will be rooting for you. With affection, Evelyn Thompson. Evelyn's words resonated deeply with Charles. He understood that although their lives had been separated, Evelyn's impact on his life would be eternal. From that moment on, he decided to honor her memory and teachings by living a life of purpose and empathy. Charles treasured the letter, a constant reminder of where his journey had begun and where it could still take him. And with that, he finally found the peace he was looking for, not in material achievements, but in human connections and the impact he could leave on the world. Charles's work in the organization he had founded brought him a new life, a life that was rich not in financial terms but in meaning. He helped young people who, like Mia, faced unimaginable hardships, and each legal victory, each case resolved, was a new reason to believe he had found his true calling. But despite all his progress, there was one issue that Charles still hadn't been able to resolve. Evelyn. Ever since he received the letter, he felt like there was something unsaid. One last piece of the puzzle he needed to find. He hadn't seen her in months, and even though he knew she wanted distance, Charles felt there was something more to be said between them. One day, while Charles was in his makeshift office at the orphanage, he received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line, the voice was familiar but charged with urgency. It was Sarah, the young teacher Evelyn had helped years ago. "Charles, you need to come quickly," she said, her voice shaking. "It's Evelyn. She's in the hospital." Charles' heart skipped a beat. He dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. When he arrived, he found Sarah in the waiting room, her eyes swollen from crying. "She's very weak, Charles. The doctors say not long." Charles felt a lump form in his throat as he followed Sarah to Evelyn's room. There, lying on a bed surrounded by machines that monitored her every heartbeat, was the woman who had changed her life forever. She looked small and fragile, but there was a calmness in her face that Charles had never seen before. Seeing him enter, Evelyn smiled faintly. "Charles, I knew you would come." He walked over and took her hand. "Evelyn, I'm sorry for everything. For not understanding sooner, for invading your privacy, for..." Evelyn interrupted him, squeezing his hand tighter than he expected. "No, Charles, there is nothing to forgive. You needed to find your way and you did. That's all that matters." Charles tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. "You've done so much for me, Evelyn, I can never repay you." She smiled again, her eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed to transcend the moment. Charles, you have already given back in ways I may never understand. What I did for you, you are doing for so many others. And that is all I could have asked for. The moment of peace was interrupted when Evelyn began coughing violently, and the machines around her began to beep. Charles called for a nurse, but Evelyn grabbed his hand again, holding him in place. "No," she whispered with difficulty. "I don't have much time. I need to tell you something." Charles leaned in to hear better. "What is it, Evelyn? What do you need to say?" Evelyn took a deep breath as if gathering all her strength to speak. "Charles, I never told you, but the money I used to help young people wasn't just my husband's. He got me involved in things I never should have done. To have participated, I knew it was wrong, but I was blinded by love and loyalty." Charles felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean, Evelyn?" She closed her eyes for a moment as if preparing herself for a painful confession. "The money was part of a deal that destroyed so many people's lives. And so, I decided to dedicate my life to helping those who could be redeemed, even if I couldn't be." The revelation shocked Charles, but he knew this was not the time to judge. "Evelyn, you've done so much good. You've saved lives. You've redeemed so many souls. This has to count for something." Evelyn opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe, but I needed you to know. You were my last redemption, Charles. If you continue to do good, then maybe, just maybe, everything I've done wrong can be forgiven." The machine started beeping louder and the doctors rushed in. They pushed Charles away, but he couldn't take his eyes off Evelyn. He saw the life slowly slipping away from her as the doctors tried everything they could to keep her. But deep down, Charles knew this was the end. When Evelyn's heart finally stopped, Charles's world seemed to freeze. She was gone, but her words remained. She had carried guilt he had never imagined. And even in her last moments, she was more concerned with redeeming her actions than saving herself. Charles left the hospital feeling different. It wasn't just the sadness of losing someone that had become so important to him. It was the weight of knowledge, the responsibility of carrying forward Evelyn's legacy. Not just the legacy of the good she had done, but also the need to confront the shadows of her past. The final surprise of Evelyn's life was not just the secret she kept, but the way that secret became a new starting point for Charles. He knew that his mission now was not only to continue helping underprivileged youth, but also to address the mistakes of the past so that the good he did could truly honor Evelyn's memory. The days after Evelyn's death were difficult for Charles. Her absence left a profound gap in his life, but it also ignited a fire of determination he had never felt before. He knew the best way to honor her memory was to continue the work she had started and, more importantly, face the shadows she had left behind. Charles decided to dive headfirst into Evelyn's legacy, starting with a deeper investigation into the businesses she mentioned in her last moments. He knew that the money that had been used to help so many young people had a dark origin, and he felt it was his duty to bring that truth to light no matter how painful it was. He began gathering documents, researching old business agreements, and talking to people who knew Evelyn's husband. The more he dug, the more he discovered about the corrupt practices that had destroyed so many people's lives. It was a complex network of fraud and manipulation, in which Evelyn, even though she was not the direct author, had been an accomplice by association and love. This investigation took him places he never imagined he would go, confronting former colleagues and even powerful figures still operating in the shadows. Charles knew he was putting his own safety at risk, but Evelyn's memory and desire to do what was right drove him forward. Meanwhile, the organization that Charles had founded began to grow. The work he did to help underprivileged youth gained notoriety, and more people began to support his cause. However, Charles was keen that the organization remained true to the principles of transparency and integrity, different from how Evelyn had started but inspired by the transformation she had undergone. But the real turning point came when Charles discovered a key document, a confession written by Evelyn's husband before his arrest. In that document, the man admitted to all of his crimes, but also made it clear that Evelyn had never been aware of the depth of his corruption until it was too late. This meant that although Evelyn had carried the guilt for years, she was not the villain she feared she would be. With this document, Charles went public, revealing the entire truth about Evelyn and her husband's past. The confession came as a shock to many, but it also shed new light on Evelyn's story. The press covered the case extensively, and Evelyn's image changed from a merely kind woman to a tragic figure who tried to redeem the sins of her past with a life dedicated to good. The revelation also brought Charles a new form of peace. Although he knew he could never completely erase the mistakes of the past, he felt he had done his best to rectify what was within his power. Evelyn was no longer just a symbol of kindness, but a complex woman with flaws and virtues that he was privileged to know. Charles's organization grew even more after the revelation, with donations and support coming in from people who were touched by Evelyn's story. He continued his work, but with a new perspective, one that combined his quest for justice with the compassion he had learned from Evelyn. Years passed, and Charles became a respected figure in the community, not because of his former success as a lawyer, but because of the impact his organization had on the lives of hundreds of young people. He never forgot Evelyn, keeping her letter as a daily reminder of what motivated him to change his life. One autumn day, as Charles walked through the park where he used to meet Evelyn, he stopped to reflect. The city seemed more alive, more vibrant, and he realized that despite the difficulties, he had found something he had never had before: purpose and peace. Looking at the horizon, Charles muttered to himself as if he was talking to Evelyn, "We did it. Thanks for showing me the way." He knew his journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time, Charles felt he was on the right path, a path that, even though it was full of obstacles, was filled with meaning and truth. 5 years have passed since Evelyn's passing, and Charles Donovan's life has taken a turn he never could have predicted. The organization he founded, now called the Evelyn Thompson Foundation, has become one of the most respected in the entire country, known for providing educational opportunities to young people who would otherwise never have the chance to achieve their dreams. Charles, now with gray hair and a more serene posture, was a figure admired not only for his work, but for the humility and integrity with which he led his life. He no longer sought the spotlight, preferring to operate behind the scenes, ensuring that every penny raised was used transparently and effectively. Mia, the young woman Charles had helped get a scholarship, was now a trained lawyer, working alongside him at the foundation. Together, they fought for causes that seemed impossible to win, but that, with persistence and passion, found solutions. She saw Charles as a mentor and father figure, while he saw her as the continuation of Evelyn's legacy. One day, while they were organizing the foundation's annual event, Mia handed Charles a small, simple box. "This has come for you," she said with an enigmatic smile. Charles opened the box and found an old silver brooch inside, with the symbol of a bird in flight. There was a note attached, handwritten. "Charles, I know we haven't spoken since that last conversation, but I've always followed your journey from afar. This brooch belonged to Evelyn. She wore it when she made the decision to change her life. I think it belongs to you now. With affection, Sarah." Charles held the brooch carefully, feeling the symbolic weight of the object. He remembered Evelyn, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had taught him. With teary eyes, he pinned the brooch to his jacket, as a symbol that despite all the challenges and mistakes of the past, there was always the possibility of redemption and doing good. As the event began, Charles positioned himself on stage, ready to speak to an audience of young people and supporters of the foundation. He looked at the hopeful faces in the crowd, remembering how much he had changed and grown. He knew the work before him would never be finished, but he also knew that with each young person helped, a new page of Evelyn's story, and his own, was being written. "Good evening," he began, his voice firm and calm. "This foundation is more than just an organization. It is a symbol that even in the most difficult situations, there is always a chance to turn darkness into light. All of you here today are part of that light, and together we can continue to ignite more candles in the world." Applause echoed around the room, but Charles knew that the true impact of what he was doing was not in the audience's immediate response, but in the lives he and his team would continue to touch and transform. As he walked off the stage, Charles touched the brooch on his jacket once again, as a gesture of gratitude to Evelyn. Her journey was over, but his continued, guided by the principles of empathy, justice, and the relentless pursuit of the greater good. And so, with Evelyn Thompson's legacy perpetuated in every act of kindness and justice, Charles finally found the peace and fulfillment he had always sought, knowing that no matter where life took him, he would never be alone, for he carried with him the wisdom and strength of a life lived in redemption and love.